So today's, I'm supposed to present the practitioner's view, and I've been practicing for a long time. I've been practicing both cloud and data center for a long time. And, we are, I would say in India, in the middle of the debate as to how much cloud, how much data center. If we were on the same stage maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, we would have been debating how much on-premise, how much data center. Data center itself was a fairly big move for India, maybe for the world. And of course, an Indian started it. Exodus, how many of you remember, was started. Uh, that's what started the data center boom, where in those days, 20 odd 5 years ago, it was quite revolutionary to think that your servers would not actually sit on your premises. That's what on-premise meant in those days, your own premises, not data center. Today, that is kind of forgotten. When my first job was IBM. And IBM used to have these display data centers. Your reception was your data center, if you remember, all of you. You had this glass fronted cage with lots of lights and all these blinking things. Because in those days, a computer was very expensive and there was no concept of disaster recovery. And you had those blinking lights. And I remember KRR, that organization that broke up KFC in Bangalore, also came and broke up IBM's office in Bangalore. And so we had to quickly move these very nice looking servers to the second floor so that they wouldn't come and smash those up. Karnataka Raita something. Anyway, so that was how data centers were. I mean, when we said on-premise, we meant physically on our premise, and it took a long while for us to say, no, we'll move it into professionally run and much better managed and far more hardened data centers. There was a long time that this debate happened that why we can do whatever a data center can do. And of course, eventually most companies moved out. I mean, hardly anybody hosts their own servers and nobody hosts it in their reception anymore. So that move is similar to what is happening today. Today, we are not debating on-premise, meaning your own premises, your own offices, except for very specialized setups. Like NSE, I used to be with NSE. NSE has its own data center. It has its own floor, own building where all the servers are stored and so on. But that's a very specialized operation. And of course, NSE got into trouble for not managing it correctly. So that is the other side of not doing it yourself. That, a stock exchange's main business is not data centers. So the gaps that happen in a data center pinch the stock exchange without having the corresponding competence. NSE, as you know, all the show cause notice was related to their data center. They had given it out without the appropriate policies. There were some governance gaps, all of which was related to the co-location data center that they had. And on the other side, BSE, for instance, had outsourced it. That's the increasing trend. Data center business, nobody questions. It's a very specialized business. It requires a very specialized set of very difficult skills. So nobody anymore says that I can build it on my own, except if you're a really large organization. The debate today is, should I go cloud or not? Should I do data center? Should I do cloud? Actually, on-premise today means data center. And that debate also, I think, I'm a contrarian. I believe, just like you had no real choice about data centers, eventually you can't host it on your own because the skills don't exist, the infrastructure doesn't exist. Nobody will sell you cooling solutions at an economic rate. If you wanted to, and I know for sure, we bought the air conditioning and all that at NSE scale, and it was just very expensive. Nobody is willing to sell it to you at a small scale. And NSE was a small scale. It wasn't that big a data center. And that's what's happening to data centers themselves. You see, the clouds also hosted on a data center. No, they are not actually hosted in the sky. So they are gobbling up data center space like nothing before. And companies like us are struggling to get data center space. Because, Adani has just announced, right? They've launched their data center, all of which is already sold. It's a struggle that you will always lose because the hyperscalers will come with massive demand. And their own demand is not fake. They're not capturing demand just to drive you out of the market. They are capturing demand because they have demand for their clouds across 1 million customers. So that battle, companies like us will all lose. So my contrarian thinking is, before we as CIOs retire, data centers themselves, they will not become a thing of the past, but they will become a thing of the past for enterprises. Enterprises will not really have data center space anymore. We are living in the transition. How long the transition is, that is a matter of, that's technology, that's adoption, that's all kinds of things. And there will be some back and forths. Like localization, the directives that came up, there was no thinking about localization 5 odd years ago. Today, as Subodh pointed out, you have to think about it. And therefore, there were all these movements. Some went back to data centers, their own private data centers, because they did not think about it and they didn't have a good answer in the short term. So there will be some back and forth. It won't be a single smooth journey, one direction. But the overall trend is undoubtedly going to go in one direction. You are not eventually going to find data center space, or if you find data center space, you will not have the skills that are required to manage your own servers. And all of you, I'm sure, are already struggling with that. You are struggling, and the ratio is quite extreme, because today, whenever we put it on our own data center, managing the networks, managing the servers, require a fair number of people and a fairly good depth of skill. You can't take a fresher out of college and tell him to manage a server, because he's never been taught that in college, and therefore his things are going to go wrong. You can't take a fresher out of college and tell him to program. You can't take a fresher out of college and tell him to provision a cloud server or provision Kubernetes on Amazon. But you can't tell him to manage a Cisco router. And that's increasingly going to be the trend, that you will find it harder and harder to get people to manage your Cisco routers. So you're going to outsource it, just like we outsource the telecom side, just like we outsource the telephony side. There was a time, I grew up in an era when people used to keep their own telephone networks. IBM had its own private telephone network with its own exchanges and its own network and like physical cables. Now, obviously that went away. Nobody in their right mind puts up a private telecom network anymore. And even if you wanted to, there was no chance you would get the kind of skill required to put up a telecom network. It may be cost effective, but you would not be able to do it. Similarly, data centers will become increasingly harder for two reasons. One, you will not get space in a data center. Your own private space is out, because the quality required from a data center is no longer possible to do in a private space. The cost is humongous, the certification requirements are humongous. Somebody like an NSE does it because it is a humongously profitable business for NSE, and therefore can do it, and even they get it wrong. NSE was earning of the order of 5,000 crores from it. So even then they got it wrong. You who are a cost center are never going to get it right. So on-premise is out. It is a question of data center space or cloud space. And data center space is increasingly going to be hard to get, because clouds tend to take up full floors, full data centers, full boxes. And real estate can't catch up fast enough. Power can't catch up fast enough. You just won't get it. Second is, after you get the space also, the management of a server, the management of a network, it's increasingly going to become a specialist skill that you will find very hard to access. So the trend will always be to cloud. Many companies have moved further down the line already. And, we keep thinking, because, I also grew up in the old world, we keep thinking, oh, this revolution will take 20 years. Maybe 25 years. But it won't take 25 years from today. We are already some distance into the revolution. It may well take 25 years overall. But that overall 25 years is not what we have left. I keep thinking, oh, it's okay. I can go to Kazakhstan whenever I want. I have lots of years of life left. And then I realize I'm actually halfway through my life already. I'm still thinking as if I was 25. I'm not very young, as you can imagine. So the question is, where you are on the revolution is hard to predict. And therefore, how many years you have left to do the transformation is hard to predict. We don't need to transform today, because obviously data centers are not going away today. Remember, data centers are not going away anyway. It's just that you will be pushed out of them, comparatively speaking. You're not being pushed out today. The smaller guys are already being pushed out. You will never see a startup today taking its own space in a data center. It hardly ever happens, because they don't have the bargaining power, they don't have the skills, they will never get their enough networking guys to make it work. So all startups start on the cloud. Enterprises still have it. How many years you have, I don't know. But you must start. The move to cloud is not easy. In fact, it's quite a bit difficult. And I, who have moved to cloud quite a few times, can tell you, even today I sweat for it. The underlying technology is easy enough. The work practices are the difficult parts. The underlying technology, as I said, my 11-year-old nephew understands how to allocate space on cloud. But how to administer it, how to secure it, how to move an application from here to there, how to make things cloud native, because cloud doesn't operate in exactly the same way as a data center. How to manage its cost, all that is the difficult part. And that's the enterprise part. Anybody can put up a server on cloud. But to manage 1,000 servers and 10,000 containers, that requires a different kind of expertise, and the move is not straightforward. It is a paradigm shift. It is like moving from Delhi to Bombay, which is a cultural shift in addition to your house and all that. How many of you are from Delhi? Okay, all of you are probably living in what you thought was a bathroom in Delhi. This is one of those cultural shifts that happen when you move cities. Delhi, everybody comes and says, "Chota ghar chal jayega, 1,000 square foot se zyada nahi chahiye." And we say, "Tum aao, fir dekho, Goregaon mein kya milta hai." So that cultural shift is what you will have from data center to cloud. It is not just a matter of moving the technology. It's quite a large shift. It's quite a large move. It's quite a lot of setting up processes and policies which will take years. So you need to start doing it. RBL Bank, we started doing it about 4 years ago. And we also, one is we had to go back and forth a lot. Every time we move, we'd realize, oh, this has got left behind. And so we went back and forth. Today, can I say we are cloud mature? I would say we are 40% cloud mature. I worked a little bit with Capital One. Capital One is the first bank, first large-scale financial institution to move 100% to cloud. When I worked with Capital One was 2004, which was their first attempt at moving to cloud. Virtualized. Of course, that time there was no Amazon. That time they were talking about virtualized private cloud. Because the virtualization technology all existed. They failed. They tried again in 2009. Again they failed. Their success came in 2015 onwards. Because by then they had learnt enough about this move. They did a very harsh move. They said, I will only move to cloud if I'm already cloud native. I will not do lift and shift. But remember, they've been trying from 2004. So 11 years later, they knew what cloud native was. And therefore, they were able to move all their applications. So between 2015 and 2019, they went from zero cloud to 100% cloud. But in a cloud native way. And things that are quite unimaginable. For instance, Capital One said everything will be T2 micros. You need to get a CIO's permission if you want to use anything but a T2 micro. T2 micro is 1 CPU, 512 MB. Again, first reaction is impossible. Because हम लोग तो 16 CPU के नीचे बात ही नहीं करते हैं. ठीक है ना? Same thing, the Delhi guy, कि 16 CPU नहीं होगा तो कैसे चलेगा? But as it turns out, 1 CPU, 512 MB is a lot. And you can do a lot with it. Remember, you're talking about horizontal scaling. So you're not talking about 1 CPU only. You're talking about 1 CPU into as many machines as you want. So those cloud native transformations really gave Capital One the cost benefit and the manageability benefit and all that. My own experience of cloud, we have about 250, 280 odd run the bank people, people who run our infrastructure. Of the 280, 274 manage the on-premise infrastructure and 6 manage the cloud. Those 6 manage 40% of my setup. I'm 40% on cloud. All 40% of my production is on cloud. So 6 manage 40%, 274 manage the remaining 60%. And of course, attrition is all in the 274. So that's what is going to happen. But you have to do it in cloud native fashion. If you lift and shift, the 274 will remain. Because you will need a network specialist now except that he's doing it on cloud. Same network guy will do it on cloud. Same server guy will do it on cloud. When we first started setting up, we used to provision a bare server, and then one server guy would come and set up Linux from scratch on the cloud. So therefore, we needed a server guy. Then the server guy would set up only Linux. Then one middleware guy would come and set up middleware. Because that's how they did it on-premise. In cloud, you don't do it that way. You take an image and you provision it. You provision the whole stack at one shot. But the policies didn't catch up. It took a while for the policies to catch up. Even today in RBL Bank, who's been doing cloud for 3 years, our policies have caught up in some areas, not everywhere. There are still areas where we still do it this way, that we provision a bare metal, then 2 days later one server guy comes, 2 more days later one middleware guy comes, 2 more days later one database guy comes, so it takes 15 days to provision. In the places where we do it right, it takes 15 minutes to provision. These changes are what will cost us. These changes are what will make us more or less easy on the cloud journey. The thing is, eventually, as I said, because your bargaining power will keep shifting, keep reducing, you will not be competitive if you are not capable of doing these changes. You will be forced out. I mean, let's face it, that forcing out has nothing to do with our technology choices. And you will be forced to, storage is also already getting pretty hard to buy. Because, of all the 10,000 boxes of HP that come to India, 9,000 boxes goes to Amazon. So, storage is already getting harder and harder to buy. And eventually, same thing. Why would an HP guy come to you for 2 boxes when he can meet his entire quota by spending 2 years sitting in front of the Amazon India office? It is increasingly difficult. There was a time when every company used to generate its own electricity. Today, you will find it impossible to set up your own power plant. Because nobody will come and sell you a power plant. Ek power plant kaun banata hai? And that is what is going to happen to all of these large-scale infrastructure. The hyperscalers are operating at a scale that is so large that you will have no choice but to get pushed out. We are talking about, on the average, somebody setting up 25, 30,000 server data centers in India, which is still small. In the US, the standard data center nowadays that a Facebook or a Google puts up is between 100 and 300,000 servers. And those data centers are manned, they're called lights out data centers, in the sense that they don't have electrical circuitry for lights at all, because they are not meant to be visited by humans. If you visit, you carry a torch, because you're not supposed to visit. Those entire 300,000 data centers are manned by some 2 people who sit outside. Maybe 6 people, maybe 10 people, who sit outside the data center. They never actually go in. And they manage everything from electronically, from remote. And so, they have power to, server to people ratios of 20,000 is to 1, 30,000 is to 1. If I had the same power to weight ratio, I would have not 6 people, but 0.6 people. Like I would have one 10-year-old guy doing it part-time. That's the cost efficiency challenge that you will come up against. You cannot become efficient. At that scale, the efficiency is so large that you cannot possibly compete. So start moving, start preparing. It is a painful move. And I've done it many times. I've done it in theory very well. But it is a painful move. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of cultural rethinking. If you don't do all that, it is a very painful move. If you do all that, then of course the pain is in the planning and all that. But it is not that painful a move. My main message, and I'm about to run out of time. I have a few minutes. Okay. My main message is that this move is inevitable. And this is something that all of us need to face up to. We don't really think, even today I talk to CIOs, even I had a hard time initially thinking that it's inevitable. I used to think, we can survive forever on a data center. But actually we can't. Even today, Sharad is a very good old friend of mine, but I find it very hard to get space from NetMagic. Not because they don't want to give it to me, but because they have nothing to give. And so that is a challenge that I constantly, so we've started saying now, it is inevitable that we will move to data center, which means my cost base will change, my practices will change. I need to follow that Capital One model where I insist that everybody is cloud native. And then I have a choice. Once I am cloud native, I can run it at least for some time on physical infrastructure in a data center. Because data center also, the technology is available to you. I mean, every data center is virtualized nowadays. But if I'm not cloud native to start with, then the move will not happen. Today I'm running it in data center as a convenience. Or rather, today I'm running it as a necessity. Tomorrow I want to run it as a convenience. Because for a bank, CapEx is cheaper than OpEx and so on and so forth. But those decisions, I don't want it taken away and me being unprepared for it. So that's my major contrarian. The second contrarian part is, if we are to move away to cloud, we also have to start thinking how much to rely on cloud native services. And this is a big if. I don't have a good answer. I'm just pointing out the problem. And this is something we are debating. For instance, databases, we have been traditionally used to database licenses that are owned by us or directly attributable to us. If I have to move to, for instance, Oracle is offering Oracle Cloud, that they are offering this managed Oracle Cloud, right? It's a service. You don't own the license. You pay by the usage. Similarly, Amazon offers RDS and Amazon DynamoDB. How much should I move there? How much should I give up? Because one is giving up the physical hardware, the management of the network and the server and all that. How much to give up the management of the application? That's the next big thing. And in some cases, it's obvious. Salesforce, I cannot build my own private Salesforce. So I'm going to do Salesforce on the cloud. Some are not so obvious. Oracle's autonomous cloud, is it better for us to go to autonomous or better for us to stick to on-premise and get my own DBA? The answer to me is not obvious. I don't know whether one is better than the other. And of course, there are 50 such services. It's not just database. Database is one of the bigger ones, but there are many other such services. Should I go APM on my own license with my own ELK setup, or should I just take CloudFront, cloud monitoring, that kind of thing? These debates will also need to happen. In addition to the physical challenge of not having a data center, you'll also have these software challenges of moving models. Should I be far more pure OpEx? And remember, lock-in, of course, we were all locked into IBM and Oracle also. It's not that we were not. And IBM and Oracle used to extract fair amounts of rent because they knew we could not move out. Lock-in is a reality, but of course you have to evaluate who you're locked into and how much is the rent being extracted. So similarly, we'll have lock-ins on cloud. Which cloud to lock into, how much rent they're extracting, what is the, suppose I go full-fledged on DynamoDB and I discover that DynamoDB's roadmap is much worse than, let's say, Google's whatever cloud. And then I'm kind of stuck because I find it very hard to move. Similar questions we faced in the Oracle world or the IBM world. You go wholesale in one product and you realize that product is not evolving as fast as its competitors. And therefore, those questions have to start being thought. That's the second part. It's not just a matter of networks and servers. You need to think about this transition in terms of underlying platforms as well. The most underlying platform is container. All of you have to go to containers eventually. The server-centric model is not efficient at all on the cloud. Frankly, it's not efficient even in a data center. But definitely on a cloud, it's going to cost you very dearly. So you have to move to the container-centric model. Then you have all these other choices to make. Your own container platform, the cloud's container platform, or open source container platforms. All that you have to choose. Then you have to choose, how much is SaaS, how much is on-premise, how much is on-premise then will be on license, my own direct setup. As opposed to the shared setup of a autonomous database or the shared setup of a DynamoDB. These are the two challenges that you will face. And I don't know if we have yet the good answers to them. So there will be a large amount of debate that I encourage all of you to participate in. We don't yet have, across the world, even a Capital One doesn't have perfect answers. Capital One has some answers. And those answers may not apply to you. As a whole, we are in the middle of a paradigm shift. All industries are. The cloud has been adopted quite heavily by one particular kind of customer. And they've seen dramatic success on it. Customers like us, actually, you could make a case that it is better for us to stay on-premise. But remember, we are not going to have the choice. We are going to be forced into it. So we have to have these debates without this assumption that we can remain. There was a time when we were debating whether horses were better than cars. But nobody has that choice. You may love your horse, but you can't possibly get a horse-driven carriage anymore. So, and same thing will happen to, for instance, petrol cars. Soon you will not get petrol cars. You will not get filling stations. You will not get petrol. You may have your car. I had an uncle who used to restore old vintage cars. And his biggest problem was nobody had the blueprints for the spare parts. So the spare part was easy to manufacture, but you did not know what the blueprint was. So that debate is gone. You are going to be forced to go only one direction. That direction has a lot of adoption challenges. Instead of saying it is hard, we have to figure out how to say what is the best choice in that world. That's my basic message. Questions? Apparently, after all this, you may have questions. Amazing.
Any question, you can put your hands up, please. Can I have more light in the audience as well? Basically our technical team, the gentleman who was supposed to have his honeymoon tonight, because of this event, it wasn't possible. So he's created a honeymoon atmosphere in the hall as well. So I understand. Love you. Any questions? Please feel free. We do not charge for questions. It's on the house. It's like how you enter a party and you get free drinks. You get free questions here. Anybody? Well, that means I always believe, all right, when a speaker doesn't have too many questions, which means he's done a damn good job on stage. You've given it all right, last chance. There's a gentleman there. Oh, on the left. So I'll go in the back. Thank you so much, and I'll come to you as well. Sir, please stand up. What's your name?
Mihir Hardas. Hi, sir. This is Mihir Hardas
Hi, Mihir.
from Morgan Stanley.
Hi.
I wanted to know if you have any caveat for financial organizations about their cloud journey.
So financial organizations, in addition to all the basic infrastructure, will have to deal with two things. Financial data is particularly sensitive, so it is much more likely to be regulated in national boundaries, as opposed to, let's say, manufacturing data or media data. Media is another big user of cloud and data centers. But financial data is much more likely to run into regulatory barriers. It is again still forming. You see, most people think RBI has already said this, that, and the other. Actually, in most cases, RBI has put out various opinions but has not decided yet. And across the world, that is true. Singapore's MAS also, they put out various opinion papers, this, that, but they have not decided yet. But the direction, even with an RBI or a MAS, is towards cloud. It's just that they have additional checks and balances. There are certain things you cannot do on a shared cloud. There are certain things you cannot do. There are certain risks you cannot move to the cloud. You cannot say, cloud will become responsible. You will continue to be responsible even if you put it on cloud. All of it is in the direction that eventually banks will become 100% cloud. But how to do it, what to manage, where the data sits, who owns that data, how to manage the integrity of a transaction, those are the questions that regulators will impose on financial clouds. The second part is, banks in particular are actually always behind the curve in adopting technology. There are banks that are still running on mainframes, and they will have a much harder time moving. Banks have in particular valued stability over dynamic change. Now we are forced to do a lot of dynamic change because, as you saw in the previous presentation, our own world is changing quite dramatically. And therefore, we are scrambling to do this. Now, there's no real way to do this huge UPI volumes on an on-premise setup. It's just not possible. You can't buy hardware fast enough to accommodate an 800, 900% growth in your payment setup. So, we are therefore having to dance at the edge. That's the, sorry. That's the main concern of financial institutions. One is the data we deal with is particularly sensitive, and this sudden change in our own circumstances is forcing us to rethink our entire strategy.
Thank you.